worst parts of going through trauma is that afterward, you start to beat yourself up for not getting over it fast enough. It can feel really hopeless and make you feel stuck when things from your past just keep haunting you, because it's not like I can go back in a time machine and fix it. It's just in my past and is going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Today, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about some discoveries in neuroscience that may change the ways that you view your past. And we're also going to talk about a framework that I use to help clients process things from their past so that they can move forward in their lives. My name is Sean. I'm a mental health coach. I see 40 plus clients a week, and I have a 98% satisfaction score from over 1,600 ratings. So yes, these experiences are in the past, and to the best of my knowledge, time travel has not yet been invented. Although, that being said, if time travel was invented, then the future kind of becomes an illusion and all time kind of runs simultaneously. But anyway, even though we can't go back into the past, what neuroscience has recently discovered is that when a traumatic event happens and when you are triggered, your brain actually lights up in the exact same way. So what that means is that to your brain, when you are triggered, there is no difference between when you are triggered and when the traumatic event is happening. And I know it sounds sort of weird, but that is actually really good news. Because you know how problems always seem to trace back to when we were kids? You know, you go to therapy or something and they're always like, it's an issue with your mother, it's an issue with your father. The reason that the issues always seem to trace back to when we were kids is not because more problems happen when we're kids, it's because our brains aren't as developed. And so we don't have the same sort of cognitive ability to process what we have gone through. And that's what parents are for. Parents are there to help us process things. But when parents are not there to help us process things as kids, or when parents are the perpetrators that are causing the mental damage, then as a kid, we don't have the capability, literally our brain is not developed enough to be able to process that stuff. And so instead, it just sort of gets stored and stays dormant in our body until something comes along that is a trigger and triggers us back to that situation. So when you are triggered in a situation, because your brain doesn't know the difference between the traumatic event and the trigger, it is an opportunity to reprocess what it is that you went through, but this time with your big adult brain instead of your undeveloped child brain. So let me give you an example. Let's say that when you were younger, you were bullied, and the conclusion that you came to as a child was that something was wrong with you, that you were bad and wrong, and that's why these kids were picking on you. And then as you go throughout your life, you get a job in an office, and you have a boss that treats you in a way that triggers that same feeling of, oh, I'm being bullied. But this time, because you have your big adult brain, you're able to recognize that, oh, the reason that my boss is triggering me is actually not because the reason that my boss is bullying me, the reason that my boss is bullying me is not actually because I am bad and wrong. It's not because I'm not good at my job, because I know that I kick ass at my job. The reason that my boss is bullying me is actually because he's insecure, that he's not comfortable in his position and is afraid that he's going to get fired or not do a good job as a manager. And so he's micromanaging me and bullying me around to make himself feel more safe and secure. And now comes the tricky part, because what you can do is when you have that realization of, oh, my boss is actually just insecure, it's not actually about me in this situation, you can take that realization that your big adult brain has had, that trigger back to being bullied when you were younger, and you can actually recontextualize the situation that happened to you as a kid when you were bullied. Maybe. So what that might look like is that you have the realization, oh, when I was a kid, it actually had nothing to do with something being bad and wrong with me. It had to do with these kids who, these teenagers who were going through puberty and their bodies and hormones were running amok and they didn't know what was going on, and maybe they had problems at home too. And so they were actually taking it out on me because they didn't know how to regulate themselves. Now, if that works for you, congratulations, you have effectively gone back in time and processed your emotions. But a lot of times what will happen is that you will be able to cognitively understand that. It will make sense to you logically, but it doesn't integrate emotionally. You still feel all of the same emotions when you think back, and you still get triggered whenever you feel someone bullying you or anything like that. So if that's the case for you, this is where thread hunting comes in. Thread hunting is a concept or a methodology that I use with my clients, where if you imagine your emotional experiences sort of like a ball of thread, I can point right to the center of the ball of thread, or like the core emotional wound, the core emotional experience, the thing that sort of drives your whole narrative. You know, in therapy, they might talk about, oh, you know, this was some issue that you had with your dad, and that has affected the whole narrative of how you have lived your life. And so I can point right to that, but you may not actually be able to feel it. Again, it may logically make sense, but it doesn't resonate emotionally. And if that's the case, a lot of times the reason why is because since that core emotional wound was formed, lots and lots of additional layers of thread have been wrapped around it and created almost like a calcified shield around the center core wound. And the thread is all tangled and knotted, and so it makes it really hard to navigate to that center core wound. And so the key is actually to find the end of the thread and start to pull. And to bring this out of analogy land, what that actually looks like is that first we have to identify what the core wound itself is, right? What that sort of original hurt, harm to you was. And then from there, and to quick clarification, it may not be just it may not be one traumatic experience. It may be a bunch of things that happened to you over and over in little tiny spurts that made you believe this thing. So a good example of this is, for instance, if you are neurodivergent, there is a narrative that I see for a lot of people who are neurodivergent, which is that they are, you know, sitting in a classroom and they can't get themselves to do a piece of work. And they look around at everybody else, and everybody else who they know that they're just as smart as seems to be able to do the work, but they can't get themselves to do it. And so the conclusion that they come to is that they are broken or busted in some way. So that could be an example of like a core wound, if you experience any sort of neurodivergence, a core wound that formed for you, that it was like, oh, I'm ashamed and I'm broken and I'm busted because something must be wrong with me, otherwise I would be able to do the work like all the other kids. But you may not be able to emotionally feel that. So once you have identified that core wound, then the next step is to think about what that was like, how that made you feel in that moment. And you may not be able to remember it, and that's totally okay. What I want you to do is just imagine, if I were a kid going through this situation, how would I feel in that situation? And even the sort of like hypothetical feelings are okay. So how would I feel going through that situation? And then once you've identified how you might feel in that situation, I want you to look for memories with the same emotional profile. So what I mean by that is any sort of situation that you've gone through that feels similar. That it's like, oh yeah, I can sort of compare how I felt here, or how I think I might have felt here, to this situation that happened. And it's probably going to be a situation that is more recent. And what you are looking for is a situation that you can actually feel. Not just one that you can come up with some hypothetical of how you might have felt, but one that still sort of hits emotionally, right? You can feel it in your chest. And when you find that, that is the metaphorical end of the thread. And what's really interesting is that when I start working with clients, what tends to happen is that as we start to talk about that particular memory and process those particular emotions through things like validation, which, by the way, if you want a crash course on validations and sort of processing your emotions, getting your logic and emotion on the same page, I'll leave a link down in the description where you can check out that video, or it'll pop up here depending on where you're watching this. But once you start validating that experience that you went through and start feeling those emotions, what tends to happen is that my clients will say things like, "This is probably a tangent," or this probably doesn't matter, but it's a memory that my brain presented to me as we were talking about this. And the secret is that that's not a tangent at all. It is actually the unraveling of the thread. So what is happening is, as you are processing that particular emotion, your brain is making connections and it's saying, "Oh, yeah, I remember having that emotion here too. Oh, and over here too." And it starts to connect all of these things together. And so the knots are starting to get unwound in the thread. And what's so fascinating and cool is that what I've seen with people that I work with is that as we start to go through all of those memories, eventually what happens is we get back to that core memory. And what's really weird, I don't know how it works, but it seems to happen, is that once we have unwound that thread and gotten to the center, then they can actually feel the feelings of that emotional memory. But they had to unravel the thread first. And it's amazing to witness, because as you start to recontextualize all of this stuff of like, "Oh, wow, it wasn't that I was broken and busted. It was just that, in the neurodivergent example, it was just that my mind literally works in a different way, and the world is built for a particular mind profile. And so if I can just learn to work with my mind rather than against it, then my life can be completely different." As you start to recontextualize that stuff, there is such a freedom that opens up. There's like a weight that gets lifted off of your chest, and you can start to approach your life in an entirely different way. You start to question the way that you've always done things, because that's how, they were shown to you or whatever, and you start to say, "Wait, but this way actually works way better for me." And then you are able to actually move forward in doing it that way. It's a really amazing experience to witness. Now remember that this ball of thread that we're talking about, it's not a nice wound ball of thread. It's all wavy and tangled and knotted and misshapen. And so you're going to have to, go through loops, and it may get more tangled before it gets untangled. So just know that that is perfectly normal and natural. You are not doing anything wrong because you get stuck. And even once you start to untangle pieces, there is a whole lot of muscle memory that has formed around the way that you have done things. And so it is perfectly natural for you to slip back into the ways that you do things. To sort of fit this into the metaphor, we all know how easy it is for thread to get retangled if you don't take good care of it. And so it's going to take a lot of repetition, sort of breaking of muscle memory, to start to get the new way of doing things integrated into your life. And finally, unraveling this thread by yourself is really freaking hard. It's totally doable. I have every faith that you can do it, but it's really hard. It's sort of like untangling a cord when it's plugged in to the game system or the wall. It's just harder. And my philosophy is like, why do it the hard way when you can do it the easy way? So if you'd like to do it the easy way, if you'd like to do it in a way that makes the whole process flow a whole lot smoother, I'd love to have a free 50-minute session with you where we sit down and start untangling your thread together. I'll leave a link down in the description where you can schedule something with me. And if you really resonated with what I was talking about when I was talking about sort of the neurodivergent narrative, this video goes through how I understand, it'll show up here or down in the description, goes through how I have come to understand through working with a lot of people who are neurodivergent, their typical sort of narrative and experience, and how to start building a life that is fulfilling for you, to work with your mind rather than against it. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.